going to be talking about navigating our post-election conversations, how we're going to support our kids. We want to give them hope, but we want to be honest with them. And I know for myself as a parent, it's been difficult. It's been a difficult conversation to really explain with my child. So I will be learning along with all of you tonight. And so with that, I would love to get started with Carlos. Next slide. And Carlos hasn't seen this picture yet, but Carlos is not only a colleague of mine, but a personal champion for me. This is my little peanut who's now 14 years old. Back in Tallahassee, I don't know if you remember, Carlos, but we came.
I do.
You do? Yeah. So Cooper was really little there. And so we've been fighting this good fight together for a long time.
Yeah, we
And
have.
yes, yeah. So I'm going to give you a little bio. I wrote it down so that I wouldn't forget because you have so much going on. But we want to introduce Carlos Guillermo Smith. He, him pronouns. You have been with, and if anything's wrong, you let me know. With Equality Florida since 2015. You are the senior policy advisor, and you made history as Florida's first openly LGBTQ Latino lawmaker with your election to the Florida House of Representatives in 2016. So although you're now a senator, this is not your first rodeo, which we are so excited for you to be back there, because if anyone has watched any committee hearings, has traveled to Tallahassee, we know who our allies and who are champions, beyond ally, are champions. And Carlos is definitely one of them. In the aftermath of the Pulse nightclub shooting in his community, he became a national leader in gun violence prevention. A graduate of University of Central Florida, yay, so is my daughter.
Go nice.
And
Chart on.
and a respected civil rights leader who has been recognized by many organizations for his public service and advocacy. Orlando Magazine has named him one of Orlando's 50 most powerful people annually since 2018. So has that continued?
It continued until 2022, and then we'll see what happens in 2025.
Oh, you're back. And you are the newly elected member of the Florida Senate. And so I know that you put this on your social media the other day, your Senate committee assignments, and we are so looking forward to you having a voice back in our Florida legislature. And so I would love to turn it over to you and for you to really give that update on what you're seeing. I know yesterday was a hard day, federally of what's going on, but I'm going to turn it over to you. And we want to set the stage with what is it that we have that we need to have conversations with our kids, with each other about. So we want to be clear on what exactly that is. And then the second half of this will be like, well, how do we do that? So I'm going to turn that over to you.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It is so great to be here with Parenting with Pride and having these important conversations. I'm honored to be your guest. I actually am joining you from Tallahassee because we are in the committee week process. That's where members of the Florida House and Senate begin meeting in the state capitol to talk about issues and start reviewing bills before the 2025 legislative session begins. But I want to just kind of maybe level set with everyone. You did a really good job with the intro, and I love that photo of me and Cooper actually on the fourth floor of the Florida Capitol from years ago when I was a member of the State House of Representatives, and we were advocating for LGBTQ youth. I've had the privilege of being on Equality Florida's team as a member of staff as senior advisor. Well, I've worn multiple hats and had various roles with the organization, but I've been with Equality Florida for nearly a decade. My pronouns are he, him, his. Of course, I'm Carlos Guillermo Smith. I'm a state senator now. But a lot of you remember me from my time that I served in the Florida House of Representatives. As you mentioned, Jennifer, at the beginning of this call, I was elected in 2016 to the Florida House, and with my election, our campaign made history. I was the first openly LGBTQ Latino to ever serve in the Florida legislature at the time. And during that time, of course, I knew in the aftermath of the Pulse nightclub shooting that LGBTQ representation would matter. And that was in 2016. Well, representation matters more than ever before, and allyship matters more than ever before. Having strong allies as elected leaders, but also just having strong allies in our communities and in our schools and in our workplace. That matters more than ever before too. Throughout my public service career, I've always stood up, uh, just as I was doing here in this photo with Cooper, against extreme politicians who've attacked the LGBTQ community for their own political gain. Now, of course, that has had its ups and downs as well. I've succeeded in some of those fights, but, I haven't always succeeded. In 2022, the far right in Florida made challenging my third reelection bid in the Florida House their top priority. They won. I lost my seat in the Florida House of Representatives in 2022, and it was tough. But like many of you, in some of the days after even this most recent election in November of 2024, after my own reelection loss, I felt demoralized, but I didn't give up. I did not quit, and I did not get discouraged. I actually got right back up and I ran for state senate. I won. And as you know, I'm joining you from Tallahassee, and this is where I was actually recently sworn in as a new state senator, standing right next to Governor Ron DeSantis, who had a really grumpy, sad face on when I rose my right hand and I was sworn in. Some of you have seen it on social media. But the reason I shared that story, the story of having faced a major setback, a political setback in this case, and getting back in the ring and standing up for what's right and now being a senator, I share it simply as a lesson that we can't ever give up hope even after a tremendous setback, even in the wake of defeat. Um, LGBT Floridians, we know, have overcome dark times before, and we've done it with far fewer allies than we have right now in 2025. The road ahead, I think, is not going to be easy, but we as Americans, especially LGBTQ people, we have faced adversity and a hostile right-wing government before. We have launched civil rights movements to protect our freedoms before, and make no mistake, we will do it again. But what happens now? I know that a lot of LGBTQ youth and their parents are disappointed. Frankly, some are terrified of what a second Trump presidency could mean for them. I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, I don't. It's really hard to predict exactly what's going to happen. I can't tell you with certainty what that will be, but what I won't do is I'm not going to do the work of the far right by telling you to be afraid, to fuel their fire, or or be a part of their campaign of fear and terror by saying I think I that there's things that I think will happen that I actually don't believe will happen. Um, but there are some things that we do know. We know how to fight back against this because Project 2025, as we've heard about that so much, is actually Florida 2023 and 2024, isn't it? Me, you, all of us, we have already been on the front lines resisting these extreme agendas. You all, many of you on this call who are listening in, you've been on the front battle lines for what the country is about to engage in. And we learned a few things together while we were doing that, didn't we? Like when we show up, when we speak up, and when we use our voices and our stories to oppose these extreme policies. In other words, when we organize, we can actually win. We can stop the extreme agenda even in places like Florida because we are not hopeless. Just last year in 2024, 20 in Florida in 2024, 22 anti-LGBTQ proposals were introduced in the Florida legislature. That was just last year. All but one of those 22 proposals failed. And the one that actually got through, which you're probably wondering about, a lot of people always are just like, what is the one that got what passed? I mean, it's gonna get the heck suit out of it. Um, and all of this happened, by the way, because you showed up and you helped organizations like Equality Florida achieve our goals. And those goals were to stop every bad bill that we could, to mitigate the harms of bad bills, to lay the groundwork for lawsuits against these bad laws, if and when they do become the law, and to build massive coalitions. Um, and building massive coalitions is important because the thing that will keep us safe is continuing to expand the people who are part of that coalition, who stand with us in solidarity. We link arms during uncertain times. Now, what we've seen in Tallahassee in the last 2 years in particular was we saw a huge wave of everyday people showing up. They were taking action at home. They were showing up at the Florida Capitol. They're showing up in their school boards as well. And that had a massive impact last year. Now, here's what I will tell you about what I plan on doing, but we can talk about some of the things that have been proposed recently, not only here, but also in Congress in Washington, D.C. Now, first and foremost, I will speak for myself and say that as a state senator, over the next 4 years, I promise to fight these extreme attacks, and to hold the politicians pushing them accountable while continuing to defend freedom and equality for everyone in our state. That includes our LGBT community, and it certainly includes our transgender and our non-binary youth in that community that will continue to be a target overall. But I also need something from the folks on this call. When I'm here in Tallahassee and I'm fighting like hell, so to speak, I'm going to need 500 people behind me. I need you all to consider joining us for Pride in the Capitol this year, which is going to be March 18th and 19th, because our fight for freedom and equality will continue. And as a community, we have to take care of one another because we're not powerless and we can never give up. And I do want to make sure that transgender youth in particular understand, especially after this vote that happened in Congress yesterday, that you are not alone. They need to understand that we'll never stop fighting for your right to thrive exactly for who you are, to thrive exactly as you are. So here's some here's some of what we've seen, and it's just kind of want to break down some of what's happened in the last month or so. We saw yesterday in Congress in Washington, D.C., not in Tallahassee, that there was a vote in the U.S. House of Representatives to essentially ban the ability of transgender youth to participate in school sports. Um, and what we saw was we saw that every member of the Florida delegation who were Democrats or Democratic members of Congress from Florida all stood in solidarity with the LGBT community and they all voted no. Every single one of them, every single one of the Democratic members of Congress from Florida voted no. Now, unfortunately, the sponsor of this proposal, a Republican named Greg Steube, a member of Congress from Southwest Florida, it was his bill. Him and all of his Republican colleagues voted yes. But I think yesterday was a really important thing to see because what we saw was only two Democrats uh, in the entire United States Congress, well, at least in the House of Representatives, actually voted yes. And so to see that happen, to see for the most part, overwhelmingly, the Democratic coalition stay together to stand with the LGBT community and to stand with transgender youth, I thought was really, really important to see. And that was really an important and powerful moment. But what we saw previously, just a month earlier, was just before the holidays, we saw a vote on the NDAA package. The NDAA package being the National Defense Authorization and Appropriation Bill, which basically was the spending bill that was passed up in Congress. And unfortunately, we saw many members of Congress, particularly Democrats, did not stand uh, with many of the military families who have transgender children, because that bill did strip military families of the ability to have medically necessary care for their own transgender youth. Now, what's important to understand about that vote, which was very disappointing, it was very disappointing to see many of our allies vote for that bill, is it was an omnibus package. It was a large package that included a lot of critical elements, including major pay hikes and pay raises for active duty service members, which is not in any way an excuse for the vote, but it was intentionally bundled together with this very divisive vote that Speaker Johnson put forward to include restricting military families from being able to access medically necessary care for their transgender or non-binary children. And I think that the reason I brought it up is it's important for us to in these moments make sure that we're reaching out even to our allies to remind them of the importance of standing with us and not leaving us behind, not leaving our families behind, especially in this moment. And by the way, I think that my personal opinion, I think that they heard that message loud and clear when they heard from many of you who reached out to your members of Congress to express your disappointment in the vote on the NDAA last month. Because what we saw again here in Florida is that all of those Democratic members of Congress from Florida voted with us and voted against this harmful attack on trans youth with the prohibition on participation in sports. And I think a majority of Americans also reject these bans, and they support decisions about school sports that are being made locally, not dictated by politicians who are pandering to extremists in Washington. But what we see is the majority party keeps continuing to prioritize these manufactured culture wars over meaningful solutions for families. Um, but the fight here on this particular issue, on the school sports issue, is not over, because it is now going over to the US Senate, where things will be much more challenging for those who want to impose this ban on sports participation. It's going to be a lot more challenging and uphill climb for them to be able to do that over in the US Senate. Here in Tallahassee, I do want to speak briefly about some of the things that you've already seen and heard. Some of you have already seen and heard about a flag ban bill that has been introduced by members of the legislature here that would prohibit the use of LGBT or rainbow flags in our schools or in our government buildings. I understand that that bill was assigned in committee today, which means it just we know what committees it needs to go through before it makes it to the floor of each chamber for a full vote. Here's what I will tell you. What I will tell you is I expect to see that this flag ban bill will probably get at least a hearing, maybe a second hearing, but its fate is not a guarantee. It's not a guaranteed outcome that this bill will pass. This is something that I believe that public pressure will work if we advocate against it. And actually, I think that momentum against it may even be on our side, because of the fact that I even understand, as I'm speaking to some of my Republican colleagues here in the Florida Senate, they don't want to see these types of bills move forward. So stay tuned for what we expect to be certainly more opportunities for you to engage to try to oppose that. But look, I get questions all the time from folks who are worried. They ask me questions about things like, well, is gay marriage going to be overturned now that Donald Trump is the president? And I try to explain it. I try to give them my opinion because, as I say, I don't have a crystal ball. I would tell folks who believe gay marriage may be overturned, I say, I don't believe it will be overturned. If anything, the issue may be pushed to the states. Um, but I'm not foreseeing a unraveling of existing legal same-sex marriages. I think that would be extremely unlikely. A lot of people ask me if we believe that gay adoptions will be overturned nationwide or banned nationwide, meaning the ability of same-sex couples to adopt children. I'm not seeing that, but I would see an attempt by conservative leaders and by the Trump administration to try to broaden religious exemptions, meaning allowing for faith-based adoption agencies to have the right to not place children with LGBT couples or same-sex couples. I could see them attempting to do that. Will we see anti-trans legislation go national? Well, we've already seen it. We've already seen it go national. We've already seen a couple of these votes. And just like in Florida, I see nationally what they will likely try to do is they will try to elevate these attacks on the transgender community, whether they be restrictions on medically necessary care, or whether they be a sports ban, or whether they be bathroom laws, elevating them at the federal level to, again, distract from some of these extreme politicians' failures to solve real problems. And so I know that this is heavy stuff, but in Florida here, in Tallahassee, I suppose what I'll close with before we engage in the discussion. I know, Jennifer, you have a lot that you want to share. What I'll close with is I am optimistic that here in Florida that we will be able, as we were last year when 21 of 22 anti-LGBT bills were stopped. I think that we will be able to continue to put the brakes and to hold back some of these anti-LGBT proposals that have been introduced here in the state of Florida, as long as we keep the public pressure on. There is a lot of pressure on leaders here in Tallahassee to solve real problems, to deal with things like property insurance rates, and making sure that we do something about car insurance rates, and making sure we do something about lowering prices and keeping prescription drug costs under control, things that we're all dealing with, housing, things that we're all dealing with, right? And so I think the more they focus on these types of issues here in Tallahassee, the more they're going to get more public pressure from us to actually solve real problems, and we'll hold their feet to the fire. And so I'll just kind of leave it at that, because I know that there's so much happening, but we'll be continuing to give you updates on what's happening here in Tallahassee. And I don't want to forget to just remind you all once again that Equality Florida is going to be welcoming folks for a Pride at the Capitol this year on March 18 and 19. And I will see if I can share that link in the chat, just so that people have information about that in case they want to get engaged in that. Jennifer, I think knows well enough in her conversations with me. Once you give a politician a microphone, you almost never get it back. So I'm just going to be quiet now. I'm just going to be quiet and let you kind of have the floor here, because I know that you have a lot to say.
Well, I love everything that you have said, and this is why we want you to have the microphone. And for anyone that has not been to Tallahassee and seen Carlos, it's worth the trip right then and there, because you feel so empowered. And we're going to talk about that. So I love everything you said. And the truth of the matter is that this post-election, period is very challenging. But the truth is, we have been living this here in Florida. And so when I talk to parents across the nation that felt that they're in a safe space, they're in a state where they have not seen these bans on medical care and the sports. The truth of the matter is, we are in the perfect position to assist them and to assist the country, because we have been living it. So I love that. Alex, next slide. Let's get started. So we just learned about the outcome, right? I don't know about y'all, but that was really hard for me. It was really hard for me in my home. And, as parents, we are often our love and support is what anchors our kids. And so what happens when the anchor doesn't have the answers? Right. When we have those same fears that we're hearing for our kids, like how are we going to talk to them? And so I felt that this was such an important webinar because I want to learn from y'all what you've done with your families and what has worked because we know these next 4 years are going to be difficult. These elections, whether it's school board, all the way up to obviously the president of the United States, they bring so many feelings with them, especially around policies with LGBTQ rights, because that is what right now for us is front and center. And our kids have been used as political pawns. And so I know it's really important for us to validate our feelings about it and to validate our kids. And so I really hope that after tonight's presentation, you feel better prepared to parent during the next administration. I hope that y'all will check out some of the resources. A lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight came from HRC. They put together a fabulous resource called Facing the Future. And they even broke it down for teachers and parents and for youth. And it's really powerful. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about was from there. And so we will definitely send you some resources afterwards. So let's get started. Next slide. So we know we have to have these conversations with our kids, and we want to make sure that we are creating a safe place for those conversations. And there's a lot of ways that we can do this in constructive. And I will be totally transparent and honest. The night of the election, I was a terrible parent. I definitely did not have on my parenting hat where I could say, oh, everything's going to be fine and we're going to be good. I was devastated and my kids saw me devastated. And the way I, woke my daughter up at 2 o'clock in the morning and said, you're not going to be legally married anymore in this state. And I told Cooper, we're going to have to move. And, that probably was definitely not what we should do. And so I wanted to look and see how I can have these conversations and what are the productive ways rather than just scaring them. What are the productive ways we can let our kids know that it is going to be okay? And after I, took a couple of days and got back and talked to some colleagues at Equality Florida, I was
Don't
like,
be
oh,
part of the campaign of terror, Jennifer. Don't be part of it.
I got better, but it was, and I think it was important for my kids also to see that I'm human. As parents, sometimes we try to hold it all together. It's hard to hold it all. I didn't hold it all together, Carlos, but I picked myself back up. And so how do we do that? We want to listen with what? Like open-ended questions. We want to encourage our kids to have that open communication and tell them and let them know, say things like, I'm here for you no matter what. So even whether we're scared and we're not quite sure, we don't have those crystal balls, what we do know is that we will stand by our families, that we will stand by our children no matter what. So verbalizing that for our kids is super powerful. The other thing is we don't want to minimize, right, their concerns. Oh, it'll be fine. Well, it'll be different. We'll get through it, but we don't want to minimize their feelings of fear because that makes them feel that, well, maybe I shouldn't be feeling this way. And so, one of the things is like allowing them to process it at their own pace. Share age appropriate information and follow your child's lead. And I think it's really important to be honest with them without overwhelming them. Giving them just the bits that they need, responding to questions. I know my child, right? Monday's going to be a big day. And so I've talked to him about, well, you don't have school and I don't have work. This is exciting. And yes, it's going to be a day that had the election turned out differently, we would have wanted to be in DC or would be glued to the TV, but we're not going to do that. We're going to pick something really fun to do and just enjoy the day. And so for me, just getting past Monday is where we are right now, not looking at 4 years from now or what's going to happen once Florida legislative session starts, but giving just those bits and pieces. Next slide. And so developing coping mechanisms, when I talk about that, I'm talking about for us as parents and then for our kids, focus on what we can control. Can we control what we might hear in the news or the bills that are going to be proposed. We can't. But like Carlos had said, one of the things we can do is look at how we can react to that. And putting that pressure, I do agree, Carlos, that is tremendous. And one of the things that I know I'm really excited about bringing parents to Tallahassee this year is to meet with our allies, because it's very important for them to have our stories to share and for them to continually have that education of what these bills and what these past laws have meant for us as parents raising our kids here in Florida. And so focusing on what we can do. We can send an email. We can call our congressman and say, hey, I don't really like the way you voted. And even if it's leaving a message on their phone or with their staff member, I know they get it. And so those are things that we all can do. And those are small goals that we can have. The other thing that's really important is to find connection. Y'all know I'm really big on PFLAG, and I love all our PFLAG families that are here tonight. Connecting with others in your community is so, so important, because at the end of the day, that's who's going to refill your cup. When I meet with other families, and even if it's a question like, oh, my kid's doing this, and has anyone else been there? Has anyone else had to figure out what, preteen going to parties on Friday night look like for an LGBTQ kid? And it's always great when there's another parent going, yeah, my kid's in high school now and I remember those days. So that's going to be the same thing for us, right? Oh, Carlos, if you have no idea. But, finding that support network, and we have so many incredible places here in Florida. Equality Florida obviously is one of them. Parenting with Pride, that is what Parenting with Pride is. It is building that community. And then, of course, HRC and PFLAG and local LGBT groups. I know we have Compass and we have Zebra Coalition. We have amazing places to find support, and it's going to be really important for us to lean into those spaces now. And then the news. So that's something that I know that I've controlled since the election. It has been really important, and I'm a news junkie. I like my Sunday morning, Face the Nation. To me, I love having that information, but it was just really hard because what I was hearing was triggering and very upsetting, and I'm sure it is for all of you. Now, I don't think we should be, totally tuned out, but I do think limiting what that looks like, knowing that does heighten anxiety. If we have, even if it's CNN, but it's on 24/7, just hearing over and over again really is something you may not even realize you're doing, but it does heighten your anxiety. And same thing with our kids. And I think it's really important also for us to make sure that we're identifying like trusted folks that we can talk to. And whether that's in your faith community, whether it's in your church or your temple, whether it's at your PTA with other moms and dads that are also, maybe they may not have specific LGBTQ issues, but they're scared about public education, and there's just so many things to worry about now. So finding those other adults that you have in common, I think is really important. Next slide. So these emotions, right? We call them hard emotions. It's not easy. And as parents, right? We said before, our role is really to be that safe space where they can process this without judgment. And so one of the things I think is really important is to model healthy coping. Again, full disclosure, I didn't do it, but I'm doing it now. Sharing our feelings in a way that normalizes it. Like, it's okay. Yes, it's okay to feel scared being a trans child living in the United States right now, when you are hearing about adults talking about, erasing your existence or not allowing you to get medical care. But know that there are so many folks, your parents, show them Carlos. Turn on, when Carlos is in front of, committee speaking, Anna Escamani, on Escamani, any of these powerful voices, let our kids know that, that there's so many people that are fighting for us. But it's okay for us to be scared about it, but there's ways that we can really be empowered. Another thing that's really good is calming techniques. If anybody has heard about box breathing, there's so many ways that we can use to calm ourselves down, to teach our kids. I love mindfulness. They're getting, there was a lot of that in the schools. I know my child was in elementary school. They were doing mindfulness with our kids before tests. That's going to be really important for us to also model for our kids. And I think that, finding a passion, find something that takes your mind off of it and help you to redirect that emotion and give your kids maybe a creative space. Find a hobby that you enjoy doing with them together. So I think that holding those emotions together with your child, doing modeling healthy coping mechanisms, those are all going to be really important. But in order to do that, we need to have some self-care for us. And so our next slide is going to be about taking care of ourselves. When we fly, what do they always say? You have to put your oxygen mask on first and then on your child, which as a parent sounds like absolutely not. I want to save my child first. But the truth of the matter is if we don't have self-care, if we are not in a place to support our child, that we're not able, then we're not doing them any good. And so self-care is not selfish. I know people will say, oh, well, going to do something for yourself when you could be doing something more productive. It's actually the opposite. And so it allows you to maintain that emotional stamina to support your child and your family. And I think it's really important when you prioritize your mental health and your physical health, you're modeling the importance of that self-care for your child and for your teen. And you're also showing them that it's okay to take time to recharge and to rest. And that's healthy and really a necessary practice. And so, like we said, self-care activities, scheduling time for a hobby. One of the things I did, and Carlos, I'm going to ask you this, what do you do for self-care? For me, I ordered one of these like dumb, expensive paint by number adult canvases, and I had the best time just, when it's too much. And right, our work's a lot. So sometimes I just have to take that breath and go, and I love puzzles too. And painting, this was something new. And I was like, I really like this. This is something I'm doing for me that just takes my mind away from all of the worries of the world. And so I think that that's really important, and reaching out to a friend or journaling. But also, I want to make a point of saying don't hesitate to reach out. If this is too much, if this is really heavy, professional help. There's no shame in that. I always say my therapist is the best money that I spend because it's that my time. So, Carlos, I'm going to throw this to you and ask you, what do you do? Because you do really heavy work. So, what's something you do for self?
Well, actually, your recommendation in the previous slide, no news, no news, no news, no news, no news. Turn it off. Like that, as for me, is actually step one in self-care for me. And then the rest is simple. It's just doing what I like to do. I like to do yard work. I like to stay at busy with no news. While stay busy with no news, doing yard work and doing projects in the house because my husband and I just got a new house, and so that keeps my mind off of everything. Is doing all like the fun like house projects. It is well, going to the movies. I just saw Wicked in the theater like right before it came out, and that was amazing. By the way, if you have not seen Wicked, you need to see Wicked. And it is listening to classical music. A lot of people don't know I sit on the board of directors at the Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra because I love classical music. So actually putting on Tchaikovsky on all of the speakers in the house and just like listening while I do my housework and I like work on my like house projects with no news. But also, you know how people tell you all the time, this is for me, this is what works for me for self-care, how they always say like, oh, you're in a little bubble and like your bubble of people who all think like you and have the same ideals as you and the same ideology as you need to like branch out. Yeah, all of that's fine, but like when it's time for self-care, maybe this is the wrong thing to say. When it's time for self-care, I I need to be around my people. I need to be around the folks who like kind of understand the stress and anxiety that we're going through as a community. And I feel like for me, having joy, like just like being happy and being gay and actually not being afraid to go out there and smile and actually show like the real Carlos, even while like things are, sometimes things are not so great, you know. Sometimes like today I actually even got a little bit emotional, like talking to a reporter. talking to a reporter about mass deportation. And then I just like snapped out of it. And I'm just like, you know what? I am just gonna go to this event on the 22nd floor and I'm gonna have fun. Like I'm gonna like be happy. Like I know bad things are happening, but putting that smile on your face and actually being happy and being serious about it, it changes your mood. And I feel like we should not be afraid to show our joy, especially during tough times, because that is self-care.
I love that. Right. Like you're not taking my joy away. I like that.
No, no.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's funny because Cooper, has been asked, oh, how hard is it to be like a queer kid in Florida? And like he kind of answers back like, I'm killing it. Like, despite, right? Like, you're not going to take my joy. Like, I'm going to be on the cheerleading team and the dance, this and student government. And it's that same thing. Like, you can try, but there's certain things you can't take away. And I love that. Like, no, you're not going to take away my joy. It's going to be hard
Hmm.
and I'm going to have those
Hmm.
moments, but then I'm going to find something that brings me joy. I love
Hmm.
that.
And
Yeah.
not
And
be
I'm curious,
embarrassed, and not be embarrassed to be happy, and not be
yeah,
embarrassed to be joyful and in a good mood.
I love it. I wish you could come work on my house as well. If we lived closer, you could have that joy and work on my house as well, but you're too far. Awesome. All right. Well, so now we've kind of talked about like the conversations that we can have, how we can do that self-care. Next slide. Let's talk about like empowering our kids because now we're going to support them, but there's nothing more than empowering. And that is a picture of little Cooper in front of the Capitol.
I love
He's
it.
little. Yeah, he'll probably kill me for showing that. But God, what an empowerment picture, right? Like
Yeah,
this
probably.
is me, right? This is me, all of me. And I'm gonna just walk down the mall and look like this. And so how do we help our child feel empowered? Because we know that when we empower ourselves, like there's that joy, right? And so here's some questions and getting involved in advocacy and yes, Pride at the Capitol. And I'm going to talk about LegCon, which is what we're doing with PTA, very similar, going and talking to legislators. But there's so many ways to empower our kids. What the first thing we could do is like ask them, like, is there something that you'd like to do to make a difference? When do we ever ask our kids, right? Like, let's give them the choice, maybe some options. We could do, if your child's passionate about animals, maybe we're going to volunteer at an animal shelter or, feel really they want to do something about homeless, not just LGBT, right? But we want to empower them, give them a way that they can see you can still give back. And we want to find ways to support each other and take action as a family. And so attending Pride and marching, here's some folks from Equality Clark. I mean, look at the joy on their faces. That is joy on their faces. Everyone in their mouths are open. And they're like, yeah, like we're here and we are going to proudly march down the street in Pride. I don't even know which Pride this was, but that if you've not attended Pride with your kids, it's such a fun, empowering thing. And so we want to talk about how we do that, whether it's going to protest, community organizations, raising awareness on social media. Hey, like getting folks to come to our webinars, I put that all over social media, sharing that and inviting other folks in. That's a way of being an advocate and we all can do our part. So I love that. Okay, next slide. I'll make sure we have time to talk. So, addressing fears about the future. We don't have a crystal ball. We know that the election has brought all these emotions about fear, about safety for our kids, for ourselves, about equality. But what can we do and how can we get involved? You mentioned Pride at the Capitol. LegCon is through Florida PTA. If you are a member of Kaleidoscope PTA, which I happen to be president of, another safe space, great organization, we're going to do that as well. Come share your stories. Come stand up. The kids, like, show them the process. And we never know what committee meetings are going to be happening at the time, but to sit in and actually see our government at work is the best history lesson you can actually give your child. And you can sign up to speak, and you don't have to be someone who knows everything about the bill. We hold your hand, we'll give you talking points, and your presence there means so much. So we will definitely send more information about how y'all can sign up for either, both, or one of those. But we want to see you in Tallahassee because we're going to be there to support Carlos. Absolutely. Next slide. And so remember, the most important thing is that we are moving forward, right, Carlos? Like the pendulum swings, right? And it's hard, but I know that we are going to come out at the end on top. And so, I saw this and I was like, this is just so powerful, right? Our love and affirmation, those are the greatest gifts that we can offer all our kids, especially now, though, during uncertain times. And by showing up as their ally, as their protector, as their biggest supporter, because y'all know, our kids are just perfect and we're by their side telling them all the time how amazing they are, except when they don't do their homework and they do stuff. But we're their supporters. That's our job. We're on the sidelines cheering them on. And so we want to make sure that despite what's going on in this country, in this state, in your county, we want them to know that they are seen and that they're valued and they're loved, and that visibility. God, the flag. People are like, what's the big deal about flags? The big deal about flags is that's that visibility, that when our child walks into a classroom and sees a flag, hey, that's a safe place. This is where I belong. And so, I want y'all to give yourself grace, know that, you don't have to have all the answers. And you certainly don't have to navigate it perfectly. But what matters most is that your child knows you are loved unconditionally, and that there are so many folks that are standing together and standing strong and fighting. And so, Carlos, I kind of want to end with this message of hope, and not end, but then we're going to open up to talking. So together we will continue to stand strong and fight for a better future. What talk to me about that. What's your perspective on that? And we know that change takes time, right? But like progress is still possible. So what do you think about that?
It
And you got
is.
like a minute.
Look, I think what we've been reminded about in these last several months, especially, post-election, is that our rights are not guaranteed. They are not guaranteed. And if we want our rights and we want our freedoms, then we're going to have to stay committed, not over a short term, not over one election cycle, but stay committed to making sure that we continue to use our voice, tell our stories, because storytelling is the most powerful tool that we have as parents, as LGBTQ people, as allies, as educators. Storytelling is one of the most powerful tools we have to actually make sure that we are educating people on our issues and our experiences. The change is not going to happen overnight. But to your point, the progress really is possible. And actually, really, a lot of times after major setbacks and what we see like backlash, so to speak, this backlash against LGBTQ people, it's often in that backlash where some of the greatest leaps forward are made, because
Yeah.
it's fertile ground for
Yeah.
progress.
And we know, right? I mean, when we hear from, polls, most Americans are like these, like you mentioned at the very beginning, these are not the issues that most Americans have on their plate that want addressed, front and center. The issues, climate change, the issues about insurance and prices, that's what they want. So I agree. I think that the American people are getting sick of hearing about it. It's, doesn't affect that many of them. Let people live and love and be who they are. And I think that, that voice is getting stronger. And so hopefully this will be a good it will be a good legislative session, because we're going to fight no matter what they do. But progress is going to happen. And I think that, I know for me, I want to be able to tell my granddaughter when she reads about this period of time in history, you know what, grandma was there and she stood up and she spoke out. And I think that's going to be really important for us to be able to look back on.
That's right.
So yeah, we were there, we were in the room. Next slide. So, all right, y'all, if you have your phones and you want to know some of the ways to get involved, now's the time to sort of pull it out. Now, I will send all these resources to you, but we mentioned some of the places to find community. Parenting with Pride. If you haven't joined yet, please join. We are more powerful with numbers. I love to be able to say I have over 2,000 families that are concerned about how you are voting when I talk to a legislator. So here's a QR code. You could always go to our website, Next slide. And our plug for our next webinar, February is the month of love. And so one of the things I know that is difficult is like, how do we talk to our kids about like dating and healthy relationships? Listen, sex education isn't in our schools anymore. It's up to us to have these conversations with our kids. And so what is consent? What is a healthy relationship look like? Red flags for when it's not. It is going to fall on us as parents even more to make sure that we are giving our kids that information. So if you scan the QR code, you can register for next month. It's going to be on the 11th. I will have a professional expert to give us those kinds of tips on how we can talk to our kids about it. I encourage you to have your kids attend this one if they want. They're not mortified. But it'll be a great place for them, again, to learn some of the really important things that we want to make sure that they know about before they head off to college or, even entering in high school. So I'll make Cooper sit with me on this one. He'll be mortified, but I think it's going to be a really important lesson for parents and for youth to hear about. Next slide. And so these are some of the resources, and obviously y'all can't click on them, but I am going to send it to you. These are some of the places that I got the information for tonight. Our Parenting with Pride, of course, PFLAG. If you haven't checked out a chapter near you, please reach out to me. I can connect you. I know all the presidents here in Florida, and what a network we have. And then also we have the Trevor Project, Glisten, our Kaleidoscope, and then we're going to send you all how to register for Pride at the Capitol.